Confusion and controversy continues to surround Scotland's new hate crime law. Complaints made to the police every single minute. Officers, of course, now working overtime to deal with it all. Police Scotland has confirmed it has received complaints related to hate crime over the course of yesterday's Old Firm match between Rangers and Celtic. Fans were warned before the game they could face complaints from members of the public who heard offensive chants on television at home. We've now got a political editor at the Scottish Daily Mail, Mike Blackley. Mike, a very good evening to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us right here on TalkTV. I mean, I sort of jokingly put out a reference after the game yesterday, you know, Rangers 3, Celtic 3, number of hate complaints filed, 1,578 or something like that. Because, I mean, it was obvious, wasn't it, that this was going to happen, that there would be complaints made because of what was chanted at the game, that there could be complaints made almost every second of almost every day, which is proving to be the case. I read a column today in one of the Scottish newspapers, I think it was Ally McCoist's column in the Herald, where he said, you know, this is, quite frankly, the most ridiculous law that's ever been brought in, and it's kind of united everybody in Scotland against the SNP.
Well, it has now. There's been quite an outcry about it, and you're right to say that some of the concerns about the number of complaints were concerns that were aired in advance of this coming in as a law. It has to be said, though, it was in 2021 certainly the case that a lot of the concerns that were raised were ignored by the vast majority of MSPs, not just from the SNP, but from Labour and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens as well. The Conservatives were the only party at the time that really stood against this. And it does seem like one of the several situations that we've had at Holyrood where the Scottish Parliament doesn't really represent the views of the public as a whole, because there were a lot of concerns about this legislation, but it easily went through in the Scottish Parliament.
Yes, and it was backed significantly by Alice Anwar and, of course, the Labour Party in Scotland, right? Because at the end of the day, they more or less want the same laws in there.
Yeah, the Scottish Labour leader, Anas Sarwar, has backed it throughout. It remains to be seen. There has been examples in the past. There was one piece of legislation about offensive behaviour at football, which likewise seemed to generate quite a lot of cross-party support. And then once it came in, things changed. The public were against it, and some of the views of politicians changed as well. And that ended up being repealed. It remains to be seen whether the backlash about this is going to be strong enough to lead to the same sort of thing happening. But certainly we've been hearing from so many different groups, whether it be women's rights campaigners or whether it be police officers who are simply concerned about drowning in the number of complaints that they've got. And that was one of the concerns about the Old Firm game. This was a game that there were no away fans present, but yet Police Scotland confirmed there were a small number of complaints. So the only conclusion from that is surely that these complaints came from people who felt offended at something they had seen or heard while watching TV or radio. So it is a pretty bizarre situation.
Yes. But, of course, you would know as well as I do that in Old Firm games, everybody knows the chants that are going to be sung. I mean, if you don't want to hear the ones that they chant at Rangers, you can hear the ones that they chant at Celtic, where, again, Rangers fans don't usually go. And both sets of fans will be equally offended. But it seems to me as well that lots of people are making complaints just for the sake of it. 8,000, I think we're told, have been made now so far. We made Humza Yousaf the plank of the week this week on TalkTV, because most of the complaints up until the Old Firm game were about him.
Yeah, I think both Humza Yousaf and JK Rowling were dominating in terms of the number of complaints. For Humza Yousaf, it related to a speech that he previously made where he was raising concerns about the number of white people in all of the top posts in Scotland. Yeah. It has to be said that the speech was slightly taken out of context by some people online, and that's probably what sparked a lot of the complaints, people that had seen an abbreviated version of the speech online. However, it does just illustrate the problem entirely, because this is a law that is entirely about concerns about people stirring up hatred, and it's not clear at all to the public, or indeed it seems to police officers, exactly what the criminal threshold for this is.
Right.
So you've got that bombardment of complaints from people who simply don't seem to know whether their cases pass that threshold or not.
And meanwhile, the police are saying they're having to draft in more police officers and they're having to pay more police officers overtime to deal with all the complaints. And that's what I mean when I say it's a massive mess, because we've also got Murdo Fraser, the Tory MSP, saying that, you know, the complaint that was put in about him was ruled not to breach the criminal threshold, but nevertheless, the police recorded it anyway as a non-crime hate incident, which was then taken to the Scottish Parliament, and the person who'd made the complaint, who happened to be a trans activist, said, well, look, the police have recorded it as a non-crime hate incident, what are you going to do now? So it's creating a kind of web of nonsense around these complaints, which may have no merit, but you still have to investigate.
Yeah, and in that case with Murdo Fraser, he's actually considering the idea of legal action against the police because of the way that he's been treated.
Yeah.
And he's certainly not been made to feel any better by events of the last week, because it was confirmed that in the case of both Humza Yousaf and JK Rowling, they didn't get these non-criminal hate incidents logged on their criminal record, whereas Murdo Fraser, who didn't breach criminal threshold either, did get that logged on his criminal record. So there's big questions for, are Police Scotland handling this the same for everyone?
Right.
And they're facing these difficult questions. There was also a pretty remarkable case that emerged in our paper today, where an ex-police officer had complained about an anti-Semitic post. And one of the questions that she faced when police were deciding whether to investigate was whether she was Jewish herself, which shouldn't really have anything to do with the case itself. But she found herself being asked those questions.
Right. And didn't the police then sort of decide to conclude that since she was not Jewish, she couldn't be offended?
Well, they didn't take it forward because she wasn't Jewish, and that certainly seems to be against the spirit of the legislation. There's a reasonable test. Would a reasonable person think that this was stirring up hatred? But I suppose what that case illustrates as well is just the mass confusion about this. There's all these concerns about, is every case being dealt with the same way? Is there a potential bias in the way that things are being dealt with? Do the police really understand the legislation? And I think this case illustrates all of those problems with it.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary state of affairs. Mike, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Mike Blackley there, this goes with the Scottish Daily Mail. What an absolute mess, and one of their own making. Incredible.